Welcome to Boydton, the first hometown of Randolph-Macon. I'm Walter Beals, and although I'm not a Randolph-Macon alumnus, I'm a native of Boydton who's been interested in the Randolph-Macon legacy and heritage here for my entire life. Randolph-Macon's great national distinction, the oldest continuous Methodist college in America, derives from its beginnings and first 36 years of operation here at Boydton. If Ashland is, as former Mayor Dick Gillis was fond of proclaiming, the center of the universe, then for Randolph-Maconites, Boydton is Mecca. Not only is this where the college began, but it is where it operated for its first 36 years, the period which gave Randolph-Macon its unique distinction as America's oldest continuous Methodist college. During these 36 years, several significant events occurred in the college's life and involved prominent persons who passed through its halls. For example, one of these events was the first visit to the college by an incumbent president of the United States, John Tyler, in 1841, who visited Randolph-Macon to address the Washington and Franklin Literary Societies in the college chapel. Another event was the development of the first course in modern English language instruction in America by Randolph-Macon's first professor of languages, Edward Drumgoole Sims. In fact, the college's very name is derived from its location. John Randolph and Nathaniel Macon were the congressmen from the Virginia and North Carolina adjoining districts where the college was located and where it had its great base of support. The events leading to Randolph-Macon's foundings commenced with the General Conference of the Methodist Church in 1824. At that session, the conference recommended that regional conferences establish colleges. The Virginia Conference, meeting in 1825 at Oxford, North Carolina, in adjacent Granville County, appointed a committee of 6 clergy and 6 laymen to consider and report the best method for establishing a college in the conference. When 2 prominent Boydtonians, Colonel William Towns, the proprietor of the Boyd Tavern, and attorney Edward R. Chambers, persuaded the Conference Education Committee meeting at Zion Methodist Church at Union level between Boydton and South Hill to recommend that the college be established in Mecklenburg County. The Virginia Conference meeting in Lynchburg adopted the recommendation of its Education Committee, and so it was that William O. Good from Mecklenburg, a member of the legislature, drafted the bill that resulted in the legislature granting a charter for Randolph-Macon College in February of 1830. The college was located in Mecklenburg County partly because the founders believed that a rural setting removed from the potentially corrupting influences and distractions often associated with metropolitan areas would not be present. Another key factor was that the Virginia-North Carolina-Piedmont border area was the geographical center of the old Virginia Conference, which at that time was bounded roughly by a line running from Fredericksburg south to New Bern, west to about Statesville, and north to Charlottesville before running back east again to Fredericksburg. The location was fixed at Boydton after Mecklenburg County outbid rival Brunswick County with money and a deeply discounted price on prime real estate located about 1 mile west of the town of Boydton. Influential persons in this decision were William O. Good, the local legislator who drafted the college charter, William Towns, proprietor of the Boyd Tavern and son-in-law of Boydton's founder, Alexander Boyd, who owned the New Market racetrack property on which the college's main building and Stewart's Hall were constructed. A key leader within the conference clergy ranks was the Reverend Hezekiah Lee of Petersburg, who Richard Irby's history recounts, was the prime mover of the college enterprise. Another very influential clergyman from the beginning was John Early, chairman of the college's board of trustees throughout the entire Boydton era, and a Methodist bishop later in his career. Another was William A. Smith, who later became president of the college and led it to the zenith of its operation during the Boydton period. Finally, there was Howell Taylor, an influential conference layman and member of a pioneer Mecklenburg County Methodist family, whose entire family had been converted to Methodism by the legendary circuit rider Francis Asbury decades before, and who operated Taylor's Ferry, a prime crossing on the Roanoke River, about 7 miles south of Boydton, leading into North Carolina. The land to build the college was assembled from 4 sizable tracts, ultimately totaling over 400 acres. Erection of the necessary buildings, including housing for the trustees and guests, academic and administration use, student residences, and their dependencies, was a daunting task and was accomplished within about 24 months from the college's charter. The goal was to meet the fall of 1832 opening date, and this was done with about a month's delay. To do this, 4 general contractors were employed with a labor force of between 50 and 100, an enormous undertaking in rural Virginia at that time. The property on which the buildings were erected was located on the eastern portion of the 400 acres, the part nearest the town of Boydton. Today, this area has not changed a lot, except that there are a number of roads in the area which were not there in 1832. In fact, only one of the roads that is in the area now was in the property in 1832. 4-lane U.S. Highway 58, which now splits the old campus, was rerouted to this location in 1941, and the second set of lanes was added about 10 years ago. You will note that the entire area where the buildings were erected is a nearly level high plateau which rises to an elevation higher than the town of Boydton. This made the main building, with its tall 4 stories and beautiful octagonal cupola crowning it on the center section, visible on the horizon from a long distance. Indeed, a very impressive sight. All of the buildings were laid out on a master plan to face the main building. This is the building which is best known to Randolph-Macon alumni due to its long use as the centerpiece of the college seal.
This gives you a brief background on Randolph-Macon's founding and its location. Now let's start our tour of the original campus of America's oldest continuous Methodist college.
The first stop is Stewart's Hall, the first of the principal buildings that we will see, and this building was tantamount to today's College Student Union. It served as the college refectory, but also was used for receptions and social functions, such as promenades, since the Methodists did not allow dancing. Stewart's Hall was also the site of the graduation dinner, the closing event in the 2-day exercises in June which culminated the college year, and was a dinner given by the 3 underclasses in honor of the graduating senior class. Interestingly, the food service was privately operated under license with the college. The first floor was used for dining and social functions, and the stewards lived on the upper level. Stewart's Hall is an excellent example of the clean, functional, handsome architectural style that was used on the main buildings and the President's House as well as the Steward's Hall. The basic design of all three principal original brick buildings derived from the ideas of Joseph Cabell, who was deeply involved with Thomas Jefferson in planning the University of Virginia original campus. Through Cabell, the trustees hired contractor Dabney Cosby and also another contractor, William A. Howard, both originally from Prince Edward County, Virginia, and both of whom had worked on the University of Virginia construction job under Thomas Jefferson. You will notice that the brick on the buildings, which was all mined and fired locally, are laid in finely pointed Flemish bond with very narrow mortar joints, typical of the brickwork on the original University of Virginia buildings. The over-length window lintels with medallion corner blocks is typical of all three of the brick buildings at Randolph-Macon. You enter Steward's Hall through the main entrance on the lower level, and the hall runs the length of the main part of the building. On both sides of this wide hall were two large front rooms. These rooms had collapsible walls so that for large social events, the walls could be folded back and the entire first floor thrown open to one huge room. The rear of the Steward's Hall tract of some 25 acres contains the college cemetery, a very interesting place of more than 2 acres in size, in which faculty, students, and other persons associated with the college are interred. A lane ran from the college cemetery south to Steward's Hall and then on further south to the main building. Our next stop is the second brick building on the original Randolph-Macon campus, and that is the President's House. This elegant structure with its classic Jeffersonian architectural design is thought to bear the influence of both Joseph Cabell and or Dabney Cosby. This building closely resembles Edgemont, a lovely small home in Albemarle County designed by Thomas Jefferson. This was home to the first 4 of Randolph-Macon's first families, Presidents Stephen Olin, Landon Garland, William Smith, and Thomas Johnson. The house is constructed in a standard floor plan for the period called a 4-square, in which each room, which had to have heat by a fireplace, is square and shares a fireplace with the other room. The wide hall, which you enter through the portico, runs the length of the building, and there are 2 rooms on the left of the hall and 2 to the right of the hall. The ceilings are about 12 feet, and the partial second floor is accessed by a reverse staircase entered from the rear of this long hall. The original chair rail, crown molding, and mantels, and most of the hand-blown window glass is intact. The large columns on the portico are solid tree trunks. The President's House tract of land was acquired from James Bruce, who had acquired it only a year or so before deeding it to the college trustees. The professors' homes were much less pretentious than the President's House. The first home, and the one we are viewing at this moment, was the Professor of Mathematics' house. Martin Parks was the first professor of mathematics at Randolph-Macon. Parks was a University of North Carolina Chapel Hill graduate and was acting president for the first year until Stephen Olin could relocate from Georgia. The professors' houses were frame, 1 story to 1.5 stories, and had rear kitchens, which originally was separated from the main dwelling in the style of the time. This house has undergone substantial modification over the years, and you will notice that the kitchen and the main dwelling have since been joined by an intervening structure. The next house is the Professor of Languages house. The original portion is the southerly part house and the President's house. All of these buildings faced east toward the original main building. The first Professor of Languages was Edward Drumgoole Sims, a grandson of pioneer Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Edward Drumgoole, and a nephew of State Senator and later Congressman George Coke Drumgoole, who shepherded the college charter through the state senate. Originally a very simple, small, 1.5 story frame structure. The 2 professors' houses cost about $1,300 each when they were built in 1832. We are now standing at the intersection of Jefferson Street and Taylor's Ferry Road, just south of the main building and the main front of the college, as you would have approached it in 1832. This is the only original road in the area that was there in 1832, and all of the land that you see in the camera to the top of the hill and the road intersection in the far distance was all Randolph-Macon property. In fact, the property that we just saw from the rear of the Professor of Mathematics house, looking as far west as the camera would pan to the crest of the hill in the distance, it was the westerly boundary of the Randolph-Macon property, and this shot looking south on Taylor's Ferry Road is the southern extremity of the Randolph-Macon property, enabling you to get some sense of the vastness of the total Randolph-Macon tract here of over 400 acres. Taylor's Ferry Road was the principal crossing of the Roanoke River leading south from Boydton, going into North Carolina. And this was a favorite route of the legendary Methodist circuit rider Francis Asbury, the renowned prophet of the long road. Asbury worked very heavily in Mecklenburg County for several decades, and one of the results of his labors was the conversion of the Edmund Taylor family to Methodism. The Taylors became ardent Methodists and established some 3 to 4 churches on both sides of the state line. One of the Taylor sons, Howell Taylor, was a founder of Randolph-Macon and was a very influential person in the background during the Old Virginia Conference's deliberations about where to locate the college. To the left at that same intersection, about 0.8 of a mile to the east, was the site of Hezekiah Lee's home and his farm, where he lived from 1832 until his death about 20 years later. At this intersection of Taylor's Ferry Road and the Clarksville Road, in the southeast quadrant, is also located the Professor of Chemistry house and tract. This was property that was owned by President William A. Smith for many years, and he finally deeded it to the college trustees in 1862. So that it was not a part of the college property legally, although it was long associated with the college, and the Professor of Chemistry house, a 2-story white frame structure, still stands. We are now standing to the south of, facing the front of the original main building. and the remains before you only hint of the splendor of its original appearance when it was still intact. The entire east wing no longer exists, having crumbled into dust some years ago. The portion to the far right is actually the center section, and the left portion beyond that is the western wing of the original building. So the east wing, which no longer exists, was identical to and the same size of the west wing that you see still standing. The building was 4 floors high and was topped by a beautiful octagonal cupola which held the original college bell. Incidentally, that college bell was given by the Board of Trustees to the local Methodist church and still hangs in the steeple of the Methodist church in Boydton. When this building was completed, it was the largest building between Petersburg and Raleigh. Its size, even today, astounds those who see it for the first time. The building was lengthened from its original plan of 115 feet to 187 feet so that it would be identical in length to Cushing Hall at Hampton, Sydney, which was then under construction. Contrast this building to Thomas Jefferson's designed State Capitol in Richmond, which is 54 feet shorter in length than the original Randolph-Macon building. Not until the 1970s was there a building on the Ashland campus to rival the size of the main building in Boydton. The 4-story western building, which was perpendicular to the west wall of the west wing of the main building that you see in the old lithograph made about 1860, was added in 1834 with the same architectural style to be a dormitory only. The eastern and western wings of the main building were all residence, and most of the center building, with a few exceptions, was academic and administration. The chapel, the main gathering point for assemblies and worship services, was located on the north side of the center section on the first floor. It had pine pews with a balcony at the rear, and the roof and the balcony were supported by solid tree trunks that had their bark stripped and painted white. The graduation exercises were held here in mid-June over a 2-day period, and there was worship here each Sunday, which was also attended by and was used as a place of worship for the local Boydton Methodist congregation. The residence rooms were clustered around 4 staircases like a modern townhouse plan. Each room had a fireplace for heat, and students were expected to use and furnish 2 cords of wood annually. This is part of the reason that the college owned 400 acres of land to supply all of that wood. All of the activity connected with the college occurred in this building except dining. Dining was held at Stewart's Hall and also at a number of private boarding houses in the community which fed the students. The Washington and Franklin Literary Society halls or rooms were located on the 3rd and 4th floors of the center building on the northeast side. Founded in 1833, these colleges within a college were the center of student life and provided social bonding and support in addition to academic and debating society outlets. They had extensive libraries, even more complete in many ways than the college's library. The large, beautiful portrait of George Washington, which hangs in Washington Franklin Hall on the Ashland campus, was made by a prominent New York artist in about 1834 from subscriptions taken by members of the Washington Literary Society given to President Olin, who contracted the painting to be done on a business trip to New York by a prominent artist in New York at that time. That portrait hung in the Washington Literary Society Hall in Boydton for the rest of the Boydton era. The college library, chemistry laboratory, and all of the administration offices were also located in the so-called center section or center building of the main building. What was it like to be a student at Randolph-Macon in Boydton? Well, it was a very small operation. The physical facilities were constructed to house not more than 200 students, and they hardly ever exceeded more than about 150 or 160. The great majority of them came from Virginia and North Carolina, with a number from South Carolina and Georgia. These 4 states represented practically the entire student body, and all 4 states were represented on the college's board of trustees. Many of them came from Methodist families, and being a family of the so-called Methodist persuasion was a major factor in the attendance of many of these students. For example, in the academic year 1848, there were 6 seniors, 12 juniors, 19 sophomores, and 31 freshmen. Rules for college attendance included being in attendance at prayers in the college chapel in the morning and the evening in, quote, with decency and composure in conduct, close quote. On Sunday, students were required to attend public preaching in the chapel unless parents not of the Methodist persuasion had designated by letter another place of worship not further than the town of Boydton, which at that time meant either Boydton Presbyterian Church or St. James Episcopal Church. Interestingly, the original pews, which are in place at Boydton Presbyterian Church, the last 2 rear rows of the sanctuary bear a lot of knife marks on the rounds of the seats of the pews, which local legend has was made by Randolph-Macon students in attendance. Expenses independent of wood, candles, and bedding for the 1848 academic year were, from August through December, board $8 a month, tuition and deposit fee $22.50. For the January through June session, board was $80 and tuition and deposit fee $45. The faculty consisted of 5 men, including the president, who also taught, and several adjunct professors. Judge Edward Chambers, who was then a practicing attorney in Boydton, as the professor of law, and the medical department located at Kingsville, almost within sight of Hampton, Sydney, in which 2 brothers, Doctors Meteors, operated a private medical school. The principals of the 3 preparatory schools had 1 assistant, except the principal at Ridgeway had no assistant. Human nature does not change, although times and generations change. The monastic atmosphere and general boredom of the area and life at the college caused the students to bond and give their loyalty to each other. Also, it promoted a restlessness which manifested itself from pranks to